like you never seen before, who's a lot of fun. Children everywhere grow to love him more and more. He's the number one.
Rupert Bear. Rupert Bear. Would you like to meet a friendly bear?
For those of you who are unfamiliar with Rupert Bear, here is a brief introduction. The character first appeared in British newspaper publication The Daily Express in 1920, when Lord Beaverbrook, the then owner of the paper, instructed his editor R.D. Blumenfeld to come up with and launch a comic strip character. The criteria being that the character would be both popular with children and be able to compete commercially, in particular the Daily Mail's Teddy Tail and the Daily Mirror's Pipsqueak and Wilfred serials. Blumenfeld unfortunately had issues finding the correct type of cartoon character that would fit the bill, so he asked his Newsnight editor Herbert Tortel for assistance. Tortel then suggested his wife Mary, who was already a well-established children's illustrator, to come up with a character. The result of the exchange was Rupert Bear, and he became an instant success. Mary herself devised both the stories and the illustrations, while her husband Herbert provided the accompanying captions. This arrangement continued until 1935, at which point Mary's eyesight was beginning to fail, and thus began the process of looking for a replacement illustrator. The Express then asked freelance artist Alfred Bestel to fill in on a temporary basis. However, so good were his stories and illustrations that the Express extended his tenure for a further 30 years, until his retirement in 1965. After which point several other artists took on the role of drawing and devising stories for the Express. Despite many children's characters disappearing into the history books, Rupert Bear and Friends have endured despite having gone through many hardships over the years. In the 1930s, Rupert continued to appear daily in print, despite the extreme restrictions on the availability of newsprint at the time, to cite an example. Both the comic strip and the annual compilations continue to be released to this very day. As an interesting fact, Rupert's fur colour differs depending on where you see the character. Rupert in reality is actually a brown bear despite appearing white in the newspaper comic strips. The Express did this purely as a cost-cutting exercise to save money by not using expensive brown ink. On the annuals, however, since 1936, Rupert sports his correct fur colour being brown. Rupert's ongoing popularity over the years has enabled him to star in several animated productions, with the main ones being the 1970s series, the 1990s animated series, and the 2006 CGI series. The 1970s version features marionette puppets and was broadcast on ITV for several years. Unfortunately, as many of the master tapes have been lost, tracking down even just the one episode is a real challenge. The only full episode I was able to obtain is one called Rupert Bear and the Old Hat. It's an interesting watch, and it was fascinating to see how early animated productions were made back then. It harks of a much simpler time in children's entertainment, and I can see why many fans are still pining for some sort of DVD compilation, though considering the circumstances, that scenario is extremely unlikely. The 2006 release entitled Follow the Magic has thus far ran for 4 seasons based upon its popularity. This rendition is aimed at the preschool demographic based upon its scaled down storylines compared to the original comic strips. From what I've seen, it's okay, but it still doesn't hold a candle to previous offerings of the Rupert Bear canon. Most of the problems stem from the show being aimed at toddlers, and that has put a limit on what Rupert can do in the storylines. The Rupert I want to focus on in this video, however, is the 1990s Rupert, the series that I grew up with. I really want to see if the series still holds up, and in order to see if that's the case, I've picked a couple of episodes that I still vaguely remember from my childhood. But before I do that, here is a quick overview. The 90s interpretation was produced by Canadian animation studio Nelvana, renowned for handling several children's animated properties throughout the 80s and 90s. Their portfolio includes The Care Bears, The Adventures of Tintin, and Blazing Dragons, to name a few of their works. In 1991, the Express newspaper signed a broadcast and merchandising deal with them to produce 65 half-hour episodes for television, with the final episode making its debut in 1997. Unlike many other 90s animations which have fallen into obscurity, this series still remains in syndication in the US, UK and Canadian markets. The original Rupert character was created to suit a basic narrative structure, the story of a child venturing from a safe home to a wider world. Rupert enjoys a safe, cosy life. He has parents who support him in pretty much everything he does, and they really only get anxious when he does anything daring. Rupert himself is considerate and warm-hearted with a desire to please everyone, but like many young characters, he can be foolhardy, and this has led him and his friends into many dangerous situations. Rupert comes into contact with a variety of characters, including Bill Badger, his best friend, Edward Trunk the elephant, and Podgy Pig, to name a few, and they are all housed in the fictional village of Nutwood, a docile English settlement on the surface, but upon closer inspection, its connections to the magical world can be seen everywhere, as unicorns, wizards, dragons all make regular appearances in the stories. This formula set by the original comic strips remains unaltered in this animated rendition, aside from the expanded fairy tale paradigm which has allowed for modern, larger scale adventures. The first episode I revisited was one called Rupert in Timeland. The story begins with Rupert having an argument with his father about not allowing him and his friend Podgy to go camping in the woods. His dad promises to take them both camping next weekend when he's not busy, to the displeasure of Rupert, who really wanted to go on his own with no adults around. As a lacklustre compromise, Rupert with Podgy sets up his tent in his backyard, still annoyed that being young prevents him from doing whatever he wishes. Podgy, who constantly keeps thinking of his stomach, decides to open his provisions, which consists exclusively of pickles and pepper seasoning. After arguing about whether one can survive on just pickles alone, the lid on the pepper jar falls off, causing them both to sneeze with such ferocity that the tent falls down. The pair, having decided that camping in the backyard was a bad idea, they then decide to head into the village. Unbeknownst to them, however, at the exact same time that their tent fell down, a mysterious event has fallen upon Nutwood, and upon arriving they both discover that all the residents have stopped moving. Rupert, in distress, takes a glance at the church clock to discover that time itself has frozen solid. Podgy, initially taking a liking to the situation, then realises it's quite possible that he won't ever be able to say hello to anyone again, only to find that the old man sitting next to him by the river is also unfrozen. Both Podgy and the old man are shocked to see each other, to the extent that the old man falls in the river and Podgy runs away in sheer panic. The old man, annoyed at his gaffe, starts to give chase to Rupert and Podgy, but just before he manages to catch them, they manage to escape to another plane of reality via the means of a mysterious grandfather clock. The clock transports them to a room filled with a wide variety of timekeeping instruments, the largest of which catches the attention of Podgy, who suspects it to be a large vending machine. After messing around with the control panel, the clock breaks down, at which point the old man enters the room. The man reveals himself that the vending machine that just exploded is actually the master clock, the main centre which controls the flow of time for the whole universe, leading Rupert to figure out that the old man himself is actually Father Time. Father Time explains that every 500 years he temporarily stops time so he can take a holiday wherever he pleases. In this case, he chose to go fishing in Nutwood. It turns out that the bizarre combination of sneezing reflux caused by peppered pickles and the protective qualities of canvas actually negates the effects of the time freezing ray, hence why they remained unfrozen. After some negotiation, Rupert manages to convince Father Time to unfreeze time before he resumes his vacation so they can return home. Father Time agrees to do this on the condition that both Rupert and Podgy throw the main breaker switch at the end of Timeland, also mentioning that they should never stray away from the main path. Podgy, however, gets distracted by the grandeur of the view, sees a flying tree passing by, and instantly forgetting Father Time's instructions, he then falls off the path, forcing the sensible Rupert to go after him. Thus begins a series of vignettes representing Rupert and Podgy's future lives, finding themselves saddled with jobs and even in Podgy's case, several children. At the end of the sequence, Rupert and Podgy find themselves to have aged quite substantially from when they first entered Timeland, both resting in rocking chairs inside a gazebo. After After some thought, Rupert remembers the task that Father Time gave them to do, which was to throw the main breaker. At that moment, Podgy and Rupert re-emerge back on the main path to find that Father Time has already done so. Father Time explains that in Timeland, the flow of time is greatly accelerated, and everything within its boundaries ages considerably faster than normal. Rupert and Podgy were gone for so long in Timeland, they had actually lost 75 years off their lives. While still in their elderly form, Father Time offers to escort Rupert and Podgy back to Nutwood, both still horrified at the thought of greeting their parents in this state. Luckily for them, however, it turns out that the accelerated aging process is in fact reversible, and upon bidding them both goodbye, Rupert returns back to his normal state, thus bringing the episode to a close. I have to say I rather enjoyed watching this one. I always relish stories that involve time travel, and this episode has a surprisingly dark take on the concept, despite the light-hearted facade on the surface. The thought of losing almost the entirety of one's life to a childish impulse is a terrifying notion. Yes, the pair had a lucky escape, but what if it were the case that the process wasn't reversible? It makes one shudder just thinking about it. Also, the Father Time character here is great. Portraying him as an aloof and irritable old man was the perfect call. For a while, I really thought he was going to leave Rupert and Podgy to rot inside his office while he was away on holiday fishing. I can really only think of one thing I dislike about the episode, even if it is a rather trivial quibble. I just think the explanation as to why Rupert and Podgy didn't get frozen in time just seems a little convoluted and messy for my tastes. I really think the writers could have come up with something a little more concise if they spent a little bit more time thinking about the plot. Other than that, a great start. The second episode I watched was one called Rupert and the Missing Snow. I remember watching this one several times when I was younger, as it featured on one of my now heavily worn out VHS tapes, so my apologies for the drop in video quality. The episode begins with Rupert writing a letter to Santa Claus, stating what presents in particular he wishes to receive for Christmas, including a modest request for it to snow. His father says not to worry, as he is adamant that it will start snowing the following day according to his barometer, despite reservations from Rupert claiming to be possibly broken. The following day the sun is shining brightly, with no sign of snow anywhere in sight. Rupert's father is confused as the barometer still reads snow, despite taking the time to oil and clean it. Undeterred, however, he confidently makes a bet with Rupert that it will snow 2 inches by the end of the day, and that the loser will have to shovel snow for the rest of the winter. Rupert takes him on the wager, despite it being a win-win scenario for his father in either outcome. Later on, while walking in the countryside, Rupert hears a plane flying overhead, an aircraft belonging to the little cowboy, one of Santa's helpers. He informs Rupert that Santa requires his assistance, and that he understands it's something to do with the letter that he sent. Along the way to Santa's castle, the little cowboy teaches Rupert how to fly the plane. Upon arriving, the little cowboy informs Rupert that the run-up to Christmas is always a busy time for the workers, before leaving him to greet Santa in his office. Inside, Santa struggles to figure out how to operate his new automated mail sorting system, with his efforts only managing to yield a system shutdown. Santa then remembers he wanted to see Rupert about the snow he asked for, telling him that there appears to be a serious shortage of snow this year. Naturally, being very busy, he is unable to spare a single helper to investigate the issue. Therefore, he requests Rupert to go and talk to the clerk of the weather to find out what has gone wrong, also not forgetting to ask if the little cowboys taught him to fly the plane before sending him on his way. Later on, after making a textbook landing at the weather station, Rupert's friend Will greets him at the door, stating that the weather clerk is currently unavailable, but being the #1 executive assistant to the clerk of the weather, he offers to help all the same. After consulting the weather ledger, Will tells Rupert that Nutwood has been receiving snow for weeks now, despite Rupert's claims that Nutwood hasn't seen a single snowflake all winter. Still not convinced, however, Will then consults the central weather monitoring system on the wall, to find that nothing is amiss with the weather report. Rupert, being the observant type, however, discovers that the system is not plugged in, immediately causing the system to go into red alert. For some reason, all the snow clouds being sent from the weather station are getting stuck over the North Pole, where in normal circumstances they would be at that point sent to their appointed destinations. This distresses Will, as he knows that if this problem isn't sorted out before the weather clerk returns, his assistant will be fired for certain, causing him to hire Rupert as his assistant in the interim. Back in the plane, finding the North Pole turns out to be quite a challenge for both Will and Rupert, as the compass that they have on hand continues to malfunction. Rupert then suggests that they consult the map just to be on the safe side. Will, agreeing with this idea, then instructs Rupert that the North Pole should be just on the other side of the mountain on the map, the very mountain which turns out to be the one that they almost crash into. After losing control of the plane, Rupert and Will crash land into the side of an igloo, which happens to belong to Rupert's uncle Polar, calmly making a joke that he would have preferred it if they parked the plane outside. Polar, happy to help, offers to show Rupert and Will where the North Pole actually rests, only to discover that North Pole itself has been pried from its setting. After searching the area, Rupert discovers that a large hole has been made in the ice close by a large object that has come up from below. Will suggests it was perhaps a boot that made the hole, while Polar reckons a submarine is the more likely culprit to have caused it. Rupert agrees with this and suspects that if a submarine did actually take the North Pole, then they can use the compass to track its whereabouts, as it was operating correctly all along. Unfortunately, after following the compass for some time, they discover it to be pointing straight out to sea, putting an end to their trail, or so they thought. The block of ice that they stand on actually starts to move and break away from the mainland, drifting away in the opposite direction of the North Pole. Rupert then proposes that if they all put their heads together, someone will be able to think of an idea. Uncle Polar, quick on his toes, then jumps into the water in order to push the ice back the other way, only for his idea to backfire as a thick fog instantly descends on the trio. Will then takes another glance at the compass to find that the needle is once again spinning erratically just like it did before. Uncle Polar and Rupert quickly realise that the submarine that they're chasing is likely to be directly beneath them, and sure enough their small ice platform is violently thrown to a side, where a giant whale then proceeds to gobble them whole. Now stuck inside a whale's mouth, Will proceeds to place the blame on Rupert, praying that he is working on a plan to escape. However, before Rupert can say anything else, he finds the North Pole that they've been looking for, wedged fast inside the whale's teeth. Their quarry wasn't a submarine after all, more so a mammal the size of several buses. After some effort, the group managed to pull the pole free, a small consolation as they still have a small issue of trying to escape from the whale itself. Then suddenly the whale proceeds to swallow, causing the trio to grasp a hold of the North Pole tightly, anticipating a gruesome end. Conversely, rather than falling further into the digestive tract, they are then expelled outside via the means of the blowhole exit in the roof. The whale, at first appearing to stare menacingly at the adventurers, reveals himself to be a gentle, bumbling creature of the waves. After breathing a sigh of relief, the whale clarifies that ever since he swallowed that candy stick, he had been suffering with toothache, at which point Rupert points out that in reality he actually swallowed the North Pole. The whale states that his kind are renowned for having an affinity for sweets, going on to claim the fact to be common knowledge, much to the confusion of Uncle Polar and Rupert, who didn't have the foggiest idea. The whale then asks who he has to thank for relieving him of his horrible discomfort, at which point Will jumps in to take the credit, of course not forgetting to mention his assistants for their efforts. The whale then says he is fortunate to have met the group, with Uncle Polar retorting that it was very nearly unfortunate for them. The whale apologises for his error and he explains that he needed their piece of ice for his toothache, without realising it was already occupied. As a token of appreciation, the whale agrees to take the group back to the original resting spot of the North Pole. Upon arrival, the trio do not hesitate to place the pole back into its place, triggering the surrounding snow clouds to head southwards, restoring the natural order once again. Afterwards, back at Santa's castle, Will explains to Santa that the whole experience was nothing major, citing the idiom that whales love sweets and everybody knows that, a notion which baffles Santa, causing him to accidentally shut down his computer, to the amusement of everyone present. Finally, at nightfall, the little cowboy drops Rupert off back at Nutwood, to greet his father shoveling the snow off the ground. Rupert is baffled as he concedes that he had lost the bet, to which his father responds they were both right, as he reckoned it was snowed 2 inches, not 2 feet as it had done. They both decide to shovel the snow away together, cutting away to a picturesque view of the village, drawing the episode to a close. While Rupert in Timeland is a good episode, Rupert and the Missing Snow is easily the stronger episode of the two. Yes, it's perhaps a little unfair considering the plotline of the former is smaller in scope, but that is the entire point I'm trying to make. Rupert Bear has always been about big adventures, and The Missing Snow definitely feels more faithful to the original source material. It has an engaging cast of characters, a creative plot, and a compelling mystery to solve, all great ingredients combined together to make a stellar Rupert episode. Now, of course, there are tons of episodes I could have chosen to talk about, such as Rupert's terrifying encounter with Billy Blizzard, or the rather clever Mum's adventure, for example, but that would have been beside the point. I only wanted to offer a glimpse into one of the cartoons that shaped my childhood, and I have to say this small trip down memory lane was a satisfying one. If by any small chance that this video has piqued your interest in Rupert, you can scour the internet for the odd DVD set, but since they don't follow any sort of tidy continuity, your best bet is most likely to scour the TV Guide or YouTube for the episodes. And with that, I bid you all farewell, and I'll see you guys next time.